Winter, 1942. The city of Stalingrad is burning. Buildings are shattered skeletons of concrete. The Volga River is choked with ice and blood. German forces, undefeated, unstoppable, feared across Europe, believe victory is only days away. Hitler has promised the world that Stalingrad will fall. But in the shadows of Moscow, a calm, steel-eyed commander is preparing something the Germans do not see coming. His name is Georgy Zhukov. He is not loud. He is not theatrical. He does not give dramatic speeches. He studies maps. He studies weakness, and he waits. What happened next would become one of the greatest military turnarounds in history. The moment when Nazi Germany's seemingly invincible army was surrounded, starved, and destroyed. This is the story of the general who broke Hitler's army at Stalingrad. Before Stalingrad, before the world knew his name, Georgy Zhukov was the son of a poor peasant family in rural Russia. Born in 1896, his childhood was defined by hardship. Poverty shaped him. Discipline hardened him. When World War I erupted, Zhukov joined the Imperial Russian Army. He witnessed chaos, collapse, and revolution. He saw armies crumble, not because soldiers lacked courage, but because leadership failed. That lesson stayed with him. During the Russian Civil War, he rose quickly through the Red Army ranks. Unlike many officers who relied on political loyalty, Zhukov earned his position through competence. He was direct, demanding, unemotional. He expected results, and he delivered them. By the late 1930s, the Soviet military was in crisis. Stalin's purges had executed or imprisoned many experienced commanders. Fear ran through the officer corps. Mistakes could mean death. Zhukov survived, and more importantly, he proved himself. In 1939, he defeated Japanese forces at the Battle of Stalingrad, showcasing his ability to coordinate tanks, artillery, and infantry in a powerful combined arms assault. It was a preview of what he would later do on a much larger scale. When Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, the Red Army suffered catastrophic losses. Entire divisions were destroyed. Cities fell rapidly. But whenever a situation became desperate, one name kept resurfacing. Zhukov. He was sent to defend Leningrad, then Moscow. Again and again, he stabilized collapsing fronts. By the time the Germans pushed toward Stalingrad in 1942, the Soviet Union needed more than defense. It needed a counterpunch. And Zhukov was already planning one. By late summer 1942, German forces under General Friedrich Paulus had reached the city of Stalingrad. Street by street, building by building, the fighting turned into brutal urban warfare. Snipers ruled the ruins. Artillery flattened entire districts. Soldiers fought in basements, factories, and stairwells. Hitler believed capturing Stalingrad would secure Germany's southern flank and deliver a devastating symbolic blow to the Soviet Union. But Zhukov saw something different. He saw overconfidence. German forces had pushed deep into Soviet territory. Their supply lines stretched hundreds of miles. Worse still, their flanks were defended not by elite German divisions, but by weaker Romanian and Hungarian units. Zhukov recognized the vulnerability immediately. Instead of pouring men into the city itself, he began assembling forces north and south of Stalingrad, quietly, methodically. Fresh Siberian divisions, tanks, artillery. Thousands upon thousands of troops. The plan was bold and dangerous. It was called Operation Uranus. Rather than attack the heavily defended German center, Zhukov would strike the weaker Axis flanks. If successful, Soviet forces would encircle the entire German Sixth Army inside Stalingrad. An entire army trapped. On November 19, 1942, the Soviet offensive began. Massive artillery barrages shattered the Romanian lines. Soviet armor punched through frozen ground and advanced rapidly. Within days, the northern and southern pincers met near the town of Kalak. The trap had closed. More than 250,000 Axis troops were surrounded. For the first time in the war, a full German field army was cut off, not retreating, not maneuvering, but trapped. And the architect behind the encirclement was Zhukov. When news reached Berlin that the German Sixth Army had been encircled, shock rippled through the Nazi high command. Inside the pocket were nearly 250,000 Axis soldiers, the pride of Germany's Eastern campaign. Losing them would be catastrophic. Several generals urged immediate breakout. They argued that if the Sixth Army moved quickly, it could punch through the thin Soviet encirclement before it solidified. But one man refused. Adolf Hitler believed surrender or retreat was weakness. Stalingrad carried his enemy's name, Stalin. Abandoning it was unthinkable. He issued a direct order. The Sixth Army will hold its positions. It will be supplied by air. The decision was disastrous. German Air Force Chief Hermann Göring promised that the Luftwaffe could deliver hundreds of tons of supplies per day. In reality, weather, Soviet fighters, and limited aircraft made this impossible. Inside the encirclement, General Friedrich Paulus obeyed orders. He did not attempt a breakout. Zhukov watched. He understood something critical. The longer the Germans remained trapped, the weaker they would become. Time was now the Soviet Union's greatest ally. Soviet forces tightened the ring. Defensive lines were reinforced. Anti-aircraft guns were positioned to disrupt supply flights. The noose closed slowly. German soldiers inside Stalingrad began to feel the consequences of Hitler's pride. Rations were cut. Ammunition dwindled. Winter deepened. And Zhukov did not rush. He waited. December 1942. Temperatures in Stalingrad dropped below -30°C. The German Sixth Army was freezing. Fuel shortages meant tanks sat useless. Trucks would not start. Horses, once used for transport, were slaughtered for food. Daily air deliveries fell far short of what was needed. Some days, barely a fraction of required supplies reached the pocket. Soldiers survived on scraps. Frostbite spread. Wounded men died without medical treatment. Meanwhile, Soviet forces grew stronger. Zhukov ensured reserves were positioned carefully. He anticipated a German relief attempt from outside the encirclement and prepared to counter it. When German Field Marshal Erich von Manstein launched Operation Winter Storm to rescue the trapped army, Soviet defenses held firm. Zhukov committed fresh units at the decisive moment, pushing the relief forces back. The Germans inside Stalingrad realized the truth. No rescue was coming. Morale collapsed. Letters home became desperate. Some soldiers wrote farewell messages. Others simply stared into the frozen ruins, waiting. Zhukov, from his command post, remained focused. He understood that crushing the Sixth Army would not just be a battlefield victory, it would shatter the myth of German invincibility. He ordered preparations for the final assault. The encirclement was no longer just a trap. It was a coffin. Zhukov was not driven by emotion. He was driven by calculation. Rather than waste lives in reckless frontal attacks, he planned a methodical reduction of the pocket. Artillery would soften resistance. Infantry would advance carefully. Soviet forces would divide the encircled Germans into smaller sections, isolating them from one another. On January 10, 1943, the final offensive began. Thousands of Soviet guns opened fire simultaneously. The earth trembled. Smoke swallowed the horizon. German defenses crumbled under relentless bombardment. Soviet troops advanced steadily, capturing airfields that had been critical for German supply drops. With each lost airstrip, the Sixth Army's lifeline vanished. Zhukov maintained pressure, but avoided chaos. Coordination between infantry, tanks, and artillery was precise. The encircled force was split into northern and southern pockets, starving, exhausted, outnumbered. Paulus radioed Berlin, describing the hopeless situation. Again, Hitler forbade surrender. Instead, he promoted Paulus to Field Marshal, a rank no German officer had ever surrendered under. The message was clear: die, but do not capitulate. Zhukov pressed forward. The end was near. By late January 1943, organized German resistance was collapsing. Entire units ceased to exist as effective fighting forces. Ammunition was gone. Many soldiers lacked even basic winter clothing. Soviet loudspeakers broadcast surrender appeals across the frozen battlefield. Some German troops emerged from ruins with hands raised. Others continued fighting in isolated pockets. On January 31st, Soviet forces reached Paulus headquarters in the southern sector of Stalingrad. The once proud Sixth Army was reduced to a starving remnant. Paulus faced an impossible choice: obey Hitler's command and die, or surrender and save what remained of his men. He chose surrender. In the north, fighting continued for 2 more days before final resistance ended on February 2, 1943. More than 90,000 German troops were taken prisoner. An entire field army had been destroyed. It was the first time in the war that Nazi Germany suffered such a catastrophic defeat. And it had happened under Zhukov's strategic design. The news stunned the world. For over 2 years, Germany had marched from victory to victory. Poland, France, the Balkans, deep into the Soviet Union. Now, that momentum was broken. The defeat at Stalingrad shattered the illusion that Hitler's armies were unstoppable. Across occupied Europe, resistance movements gained hope. In Britain and the United States, leaders recognized the significance of the Soviet victory. Inside Germany, confidence faltered. Zhukov's encirclement strategy became a case study in operational warfare, exploiting weak flanks, using deception, and coordinating massive offensives across vast fronts. But the cost had been immense. Hundreds of thousands were dead on both sides. Stalingrad was not just a victory, it was a symbol of sacrifice. And for Zhukov, it was proof that Germany could be beaten. The Red Army would never fully retreat again. Now it would advance. Stalingrad marked a turning point, but the war was far from over. After the victory, Zhukov continued leading Soviet offensives westward. At Kursk, the largest tank battle in history, German forces were defeated once more. From there, the Red Army pushed relentlessly toward Germany itself. Village by village, city by city, the balance of power had shifted permanently. By 1945, Soviet forces stood at the gates of Berlin. It was Zhukov who commanded the final assault on the German capital. The same methodical precision that encircled Stalingrad now crushed the heart of Nazi Germany. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered. The road to Berlin had begun in the frozen ruins of Stalingrad, and at the center of that turning point stood Georgy Zhukov. Stalingrad was more than a battle. It was a moment when history pivoted, a moment when an empire of fear began to collapse. Georgy Zhukov did not fight with speeches or dramatic flair. He fought with patience, with calculation, with relentless pressure. He saw what others missed. He struck where others hesitated. And in the freezing winter of 1942, he did something the world believed impossible. He broke Hitler's army. If you found this story powerful, remember this. Wars are not only decided by weapons, they are decided by minds. And at Stalingrad, the sharper mind won.